Dropping a loaded serving tray on a customer was usually grounds for termination. Dropping one on the head of the most feared crime lord in South Boston was supposed to be grounds for a funeral. Jolene Prescott had never been particularly good at doing what she was supposed to do. The Harbor Grill on Seaport Boulevard was not the kind of restaurant where mistakes were tolerated. It catered to politicians, hedge fund managers, and men whose suits cost more than Jolene's annual rent. Tips were extraordinary. The clientele was terrifying, and the manager, a brittle man named Feldstein, who smelled perpetually of stale cologne and anxiety, had made it abundantly clear during Jolene's orientation that grace, poise, and invisibility were the three pillars of employment. Jolene possessed none of these qualities. 6. She carried 270 pounds on a 5'6" frame, distributed generously across wide hips, a soft stomach and arms that jiggled when she gestured, which was constantly because Jolene talked with her hands the way most people talked with their mouths. Her dark brown hair was perpetually escaping whatever clip or elastic she'd wrestled it into that morning, had a face that broadcast every emotion she'd ever experienced, often several at once. She was loud, she was clumsy, apologized to furniture. She needed this job the way lungs needed oxygen, 3 months behind on rent. A mother back in Brockton with a dialysis bill that Medicare only half covered, nursing degree she'd been 6 credits away from finishing before the money evaporated like steam off a sidewalk. Jolene had answered the Harbor Grill's ad because they were offering $18 an hour plus tips, and because desperation had a way of making terrible ideas sound perfectly reasonable. Her first shift was a Thursday evening. The restaurant was packed. Jolene had been assigned to the private dining room at the back, space separated from the main floor by frosted glass doors and the unspoken understanding that whatever happened inside was nobody else's business. She balanced 4 plates of pan-seared halibut on her arms, and feat she had practiced exactly twice in the mirror at home, using paper plates and canned soup. She nudged the frosted door open with her hip. Inside, 6 men sat around an oval table draped in white linen. They wore dark suits, they spoke in low voices, the air smelled like expensive cigars and quiet violence. At the head of the table sat a man who looked like he'd been carved from granite and then taught to brood. Enzo Caruso was 41 years old, 6'2", with silver threading through black hair he kept cropped close to his skull. His jaw could have been used as a straightedge. His eyes were the pale grey of old ice, and they held the kind of stillness that made people forget how to swallow. He ran the Caruso organization, the last of the old Irish-Italian hybrid syndicates that still controlled the ports, unions, and a significant percentage of the pharmaceutical supply chain moving through New England. He was reviewing a leather folio of documents that, to the untrained eye, might have been shipping invoices. Were not shipping invoices. Jolene did not know any of this. She knew only that Table 7 had ordered the halibut, and that Feldstein would fire her if she let it get cold. She made it 4 steps into the room before physics betrayed her. The edge of the Persian rug, slightly curled from years of expensive foot traffic, caught the toe of her black non-slip shoe. Her center of gravity, always a loose suggestion rather than a fixed point, shifted catastrophically forward, but went airborne. 4 plates of meticulously plated fish, each drizzled with a lemon caper beurre blanc, launched from her arms in a spectacular arc. 1 plate landed face down on the lap of a man with a neck tattoo and a concealed shoulder holster. Another shattered against the back wall, sending shrapnel of porcelain and capers across a Rothko print that was almost certainly an original. Plate executed a perfect spiral and deposited its contents directly onto the leather folio in front of Enzo Caruso, soaking his documents in fish juice and white wine reduction. The 4th plate hit Enzo himself, squarely on the chest. The beurre blanc slid down his charcoal Tom Ford jacket like a slow, buttery avalanche. Silence. The 6 men at the table went completely still. A man sitting to Enzo's left, a hulking figure with a shaved head and hands like catcher's mitts, reached instinctively beneath his jacket. His name was Dominic Fan, Enzo's chief lieutenant, and he had killed 11 men in his career, though he would tell you it was 9 because 2 of them barely counted. Jolene was on the floor. She had landed on her hands and knees, her skirt riding up, her hair exploding from its clip like a dark brown firework. A piece of halibut was stuck to her elbow, stared at the carnage around her with the wide, glassy eyes of someone whose soul had briefly left her body to avoid the embarrassment. "Holy Mary, mother of all things terrible," she whispered. "I just assaulted a man with fish." Nobody moved. Enzo Caruso looked down at his ruined jacket. He looked at the destroyed folio, months of carefully laundered financial records now marinating in caper sauce. Looked at the woman on the floor, this enormous, trembling, utterly ridiculous woman who had just caused more damage to his evening than most rival organizations managed in a quarter. "Get up," he said. His voice was quiet. It was the kind of quiet that preceded either mercy or catastrophe, and nobody in the room could tell which. Jolene scrambled to her feet. A caper fell out of her hair. She caught it instinctively, and finding nowhere to put it, shoved it into her apron pocket. "I will pay for everything, the food, the jacket, the painting. I'll sell plasma. I'll donate bone marrow. I have excellent bone marrow, very dense, probably because of all the cheese I eat." Dominic stared at her like she was a species of animal he had never encountered in the wild. Enzo's jaw tightened. Then something extraordinary happened. Something so rare that Dominic would later describe it to his wife as a sign of the apocalypse. The corner of Enzo Caruso's mouth twitched. It was not a smile. It was the geological precursor to a smile, the tectonic shift that might in 1,000 years produce one. "Sit down, Miss Prescott. Jolene Prescott. But most people just call me Joe, or that girl who broke the thing." "Either works, Ms. Prescott. You have just destroyed a $7,000 suit, a $250,000 painting, and documents that took my accountants 4 months to prepare." He paused, wiping beurre blanc from his cufflinks with a napkin. "Why, I shouldn't have Feldstein fire you on the spot." Jolene's heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth. But somewhere beneath the panic, something stubborn kicked in. The same stubbornness that had gotten her through 3 years of nursing school on 4 hours of sleep. The same stubbornness that kept her showing up to jobs that treated her like she was invisible. Or worse, like she was a punchline. "Cos, I'm the only server in this restaurant who memorized every food allergy at this table without writing them down," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "Gentleman on your left, shellfish allergy. Gentleman at the end, celiac. You ordered without looking at the menu, which means you've been here before, which means you always get the halibut. But tonight you hesitated, which means your doctor told you to cut back on mercury-heavy fish. Am I wrong?" Into the room was very quiet. Enzo studied her. His grey eyes moved across her face with the precision of a man who evaluated threats and assets for a living. She was flushed, breathing hard, her cheap polyester blouse straining at the buttons. She was not beautiful by any magazine's definition. She was overweight and awkward, and she had fish sauce on her chin. But she was looking him directly in the eye. Nobody looked Enzo Caruso directly in the eye. "Clean this up, and finally. Then bring a fresh round. Tell Feldstein to put the painting on my tab." Jolene blinked. "You're not going to fire me? I don't employ you, Miss Prescott." "Feldstein does, but I'll make sure he doesn't fire you either." He returned to his conversation. Then, without looking up, he added, "And my doctor said to cut back on red meat, not fish. Your deduction was close, though." Jolene exhaled so hard she nearly passed out. She should have quit that night. Any rational person would have. Jolene had never been accused of excessive rationality, and the truth was the tips from the private dining room were obscene. $200 for a single evening, $300 on a good night. In 1 week, she made enough to cover her mother's dialysis copay and buy groceries that weren't ramen. So she kept coming back, and the disasters kept coming with her. And week, she accidentally knocked over an entire ice bucket onto the lap of a city councilman who was accepting an envelope of cash from one of Enzo's associates. The councilman leaped up shrieking about his Italian wool trousers, drawing the attention of 2 off-duty cops dining in the main room. In the chaos, Enzo's associate calmly pocketed the envelope and walked out at her. Dominic told Enzo that Jolene's clumsiness had inadvertently prevented a very inconvenient corruption charge. Enzo said nothing, but the next morning, a box of cannoli from Mike's pastry appeared at Jolene's station. With no note on her third week, she tripped over the cord of the private room's floor lamp and sent it crashing into a locked filing cabinet, breaking the lock clean off. Inside were records of a money laundering operation that one of Enzo's own captains, a man named Ray Salter, had been running behind his back, skimming 15% off every transaction. Jolene had merely been trying to plug in her phone charger. She didn't understand why Dominic spent the next hour photographing the cabinet's contents, or why Ray Salter never showed up to dinner again. By the fourth week, Jolene had become a permanent fixture in the private dining room. Nobody else wanted the assignment. The other servers called it the Shark Tank and drew straws to avoid it. Jolene volunteered every time. The men terrified her. Yes, but Enzo Caruso did not. Or rather, he did terrify her, but in a way that felt less like fear and more like standing at the edge of a very tall cliff and wanting to jump. He was cold, controlled, and capable of a silence so heavy it bent the air around him. But he always said please when he ordered, never raised his voice at her, even when she spilled red wine on his shirt cuff. He asked her once, casually, how her mother was doing, and Jolene realized with a jolt that she had never mentioned her mother in his presence. Someone had looked into her, someone had cared enough to look. He started requesting that she serve his table exclusively. Feldstein, who had figured out just enough about Enzo to be permanently terrified, agreed immediately. Jolene found herself working 4 nights a week in the private room, learning the rhythms of a world she didn't fully understand. She learned that Dominic, for all his menace, had 3 daughters and coached their softball team. She learned that the quiet man who always sat in the corner, a skeletal figure everyone called Bishop, was a forensic accountant who could make $1 billion disappear into a maze of shell companies. Learned that the men spoke freely around her because they had decided she was harmless, a sweet, clumsy, oversized waitress who couldn't navigate a flat surface, let alone a criminal conspiracy. They were half right. Jolene was clumsy. She was not stupid. One evening in her 6th week, she was clearing dishes when she noticed a discrepancy. Enzo had left a ledger open on the table, rows of figures that looked like wholesale liquor orders, but contained numbers that didn't correspond to any distribution model she'd ever seen. Her 6 semesters of statistics coursework, buried under exhaustion and financial ruin, surfaced like a submarine. She ran the numbers in her head while pretending to stack plates. The markup patterns were wrong. Someone was inflating costs on paper and pocketing the difference, and the amounts pointed directly to Enzo's distribution chief on the South Shore. She debated with herself for 2 days. Then, on a quiet Tuesday, waited until the room was empty and approached Enzo's table where he sat alone reading. Mr. Caruso. Joe. He'd started calling her Joe 3 weeks ago. It did something to her insides every time. What is it? Your liquor distribution numbers. The South Shore route. Someone's padding the invoices by about 11%. It's hidden in the transport surcharges, but the decimal patterns repeat every 3rd entry, which means it's manual, not systemic. Whoever's doing it isn't using software, doing it by hand, which means they're either old school or trying to avoid your digital auditing. Enzo set down his reading glasses. He stared at her for a long time. You read my ledger. You left it open next to the bread basket. I have eyes, Mr. Caruso. You and a very boring commute where I do mental math to stay awake. That ledger is encrypted with a substitution cipher, a Caesar cipher with a shift of 7. My freshman roommate used the same one to hide her diary entries about her TA. It's not exactly the Enigma machine. Enzo leaned back in his chair. The look on his face was one Jolene had never seen before. It was not anger. It was not amusement. It was something closer to wonder, the expression of a man who had just discovered that the stray cat he'd been feeding was actually a panther. Dominic, he called out, not taking his eyes off Jolene. Get Bishop in here now. The next morning, Jolene arrived at the restaurant to find a freshly baked box of sfogliatelle on her station, still warm. There was a note this time, written in sharp, angular handwriting. "Your commute sounds terrible." Sending a car. He did send a car. It was a black Escalade with tinted windows, and a driver named Felix who called her ma'am and opened every door she approached as if she were visiting royalty. Jolene protested. For exactly one ride before the heated leather seats and the absence of the T's screeching brakes won her over completely. The warmth between them grew slowly, the way ice melts from the center of a lake. It was in the details. Enzo had the private room's thermostat lowered because he noticed she was always warm. He replaced the rickety folding chair she used during breaks with a proper cushioned seat. When one of his soldiers, a young hothead named Paulie, made a crack about Jolene's size within earshot, Enzo didn't yell, simply looked at Paulie with those pale grey eyes and said, very softly, "Apologize to Miss Prescott, or apologize to your dentist." Paulie apologized to Miss Prescott. Then he apologized to his dentist anyway, because Dominic caught up with him in the parking garage. He knew she was falling. She knew it the way you know a sneeze is coming, that helpless, inevitable build. Enzo Caruso was a criminal. He was dangerous. He was probably responsible for things that would make her mother weep into her rosary. But when he looked at Jolene, he didn't see the weight. He didn't see the clumsiness. He saw her, actual her, the one who could crack a cipher and quote obscure pharmaceutical dosing charts and make a room full of hardened killers laugh with a well-timed self-deprecating joke about her relationship with gravity. She was terrified, not of him, of how much she wanted to stay. The trouble came on a rainy winter in October. Jolene had just finished her shift and was waiting for Felix in the alley behind the restaurant. The Escalade was late. He was checking her phone, debating whether to brave the rain and walk to the T station when a white panel van pulled up at the end of the alley, blocking the exit. 3 men got out, wore dark clothes, and moved with the focused efficiency of people who had done this before. Jolene's stomach dropped. "That's her," one of them said into a radio. "Salerno wants her breathing." She didn't recognize the name. Didn't need to. She turned to run, but the alley was a dead end. The back door of the restaurant was locked. She'd just watched the busboy key it shut. "Don't make this hard, sweetheart," the lead man said, advancing. He had a face like a clenched fist. "Come quiet and nobody gets hurt." "I am literally incapable of doing anything quietly," Jolene said, and then she screamed. She screamed loud enough to rattle the fire escapes 3 stories up. She screamed like her life depended on it, because it absolutely did. Hand clamped over her mouth. It bit down hard enough to taste blood and cheap nicotine. The man howled and yanked his hand back. The other 2 grabbed her arms. Jolene thrashed, all 270 pounds of her twisting and bucking, and she was genuinely difficult to control. One man lost his grip and stumbled into a dumpster, but there were too many of them, and they were too strong, and they wrestled her into the back of the van with a roughness that left bruises up and down her arms. The van door slammed shut. Darkness swallowed her. When Jolene opened her eyes, she was in a warehouse that smelled like motor oil and mildew. Her wrists were zip-tied to the arms of a metal chair. One fluorescent tube buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly greenish light. Her head throbbed where it had cracked against the van's floor. She could taste blood from her split lip. A man stepped into the light. He was short, barrel-chested, with a shaved head and a gold pinky ring that caught the fluorescent glare. It looked like someone had vacuum-sealed anger into a human body. This was Gino Salerno, underboss of the Salerno family out of Providence, a man who had been trying to muscle into Enzo Caruso's territory for 2 years and failing spectacularly. "So you're Caruso's little pet," Gino said, circling her chair. His accent was thick Rhode Island, every vowel squeezed through his nose. "My guys have been watching. The car service, the pastries, man's gone soft for a waitress." He laughed, a sound like gravel in a blender. "No offense, honey, but I was expecting someone a little more streamlined." "Taken," Jolene said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I was expecting a kidnapper with better dental hygiene. So, Gino's smile vanished. He pulled out a phone. "Let's see how much you're worth to him." The phone rang once before Enzo answered. Jolene had never heard a human voice carry so much violence in so few words. "Salerno, the single word was a death certificate, signed and sealed. You have something of mine. I have your girlfriend, Caruso. The big one. She's fine, now. But if you don't pull your operations out of the waterfront by midnight, put her on." Gino held the phone to Jolene's ear. "Enzo," Jolene said, trying to keep her voice from cracking. "I'm okay. Don't give him anything. I'm just a waitress. Replaceable. Tell Feldstein I'm sorry about the Friday shift." There was a pause. When Enzo spoke again, his voice was barely human. "Joe, did they hurt you? Just my dignity and my elbow. I have a bruise, shaped like Rhode Island, which is fitting. I'm coming to get you. Stay alive. That's not a request." The line went dead. Gino pocketed the phone, looking pleased with himself. He'll fold. Always fold when it's personal. Jolene didn't respond, she was thinking. Ties were industrial grade, tight enough to dig into her wrists, but the metal chair she was strapped to was cheap. Folding legs, spot welds. She could feel one of the left joints wobbling every time she shifted her weight. Her whole life, it had been the first thing people saw, and the last thing they respected. Job interviews where the hiring manager's eyes traveled her body before her resume. First dates that never became second dates. Own father, before he left, calling her my little elephant in a tone that stopped being affectionate around the time she turned 12. 270 pounds of soft, inconvenient, apologetic flesh. For the first time in her life, Jolene decided to stop apologizing. Gino had moved to the far side of the warehouse, yelling into his phone about perimeter security. One guard remained near Jolene, a bored-looking man scrolling through his phone with a pistol tucked lazily into his waistband. Jolene planted her feet. She took a breath, and then she hurled every ounce of her body weight sideways, throwing herself and the chair onto the concrete floor with the force of a wrecking ball in a polyester skirt. The chair disintegrated. The spot welds on the left side gave way first. Then the back legs buckled, and the whole thing collapsed into a pile of cheap aluminum and broken zip ties. Jolene hit the ground hard enough to see stars, but her hands were free. The guard looked up from his phone. What the? Jolene was already moving. On the floor beside her was a fire extinguisher, mounted to the wall at knee height, half rusted and probably older than she was. Grabbed it, swung it with both hands, and caught the guard directly in the kneecap with a crunch that echoed through the warehouse like a gunshot. He went down screaming, his pistol clattering across the floor. "Oh God, oh no. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," Jolene gasped, because some reflexes were hardwired and apologizing for violence was apparently one of hers, even when the violence was entirely justified. She scrambled for the pistol and didn't know how to use it. Never held a gun. She shoved it into her apron pocket instead and ran for the nearest door, a rusted service exit on the east wall. She was 3 steps away when the main doors of the warehouse exploded inward. Not figuratively, an armored black SUV smashed through the corrugated steel panels like they were tinfoil. Behind it, 2 more vehicles screeched to a halt, and men in tactical vests poured out with the coordinated precision of a military operation that had been rehearsed for exactly this nightmare. Enzo Caruso stepped out of the lead vehicle. He was wearing a Kevlar vest over a white dress shirt. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow. He held a matte black shotgun in one hand with the casual competence of a man holding an umbrella. His grey eyes were no longer ice. They were something worse. They were nothing. Empty. The eyes of a man who had already decided how many people in this room were going to die and was simply working through the arithmetic. Gino Salerno's men opened fire from behind a row of shipping containers. The warehouse became a thunderstorm of muzzle flash and ricocheting steel. Enzo moved through it like he'd been born in crossfire. Every shot he fired was deliberate, surgical. Dominic flanked left with 4 men. The skeletal accountant, who turned out to be disturbingly proficient with a rifle, covered the catwalks above. Gino panicked. He grabbed a gun and fired wildly toward the door, then turned and sprinted toward Jolene, grabbing her by the hair and pressing a pistol to her temple. "Back off, Caruso!" Gino screamed. "I'll do it! I swear to God, I'll—" Jolene didn't think, swung her elbow backward into Gino's solar plexus with the full rotational force of 270 pounds of terrified, furious woman. It was graceless. It was uncoordinated. It was devastating. Gino doubled over, gasping, and the gun dropped from his hand. Enzo was there in 3 strides. He didn't shoot Gino. He grabbed him by the throat with one hand and lifted him off the ground like a man picking up a grocery bag. Gino's feet dangled, his face turned purple. "Yeah, you put your hands on her," Enzo said quietly. "You pointed a gun at her head. You called her a pet." He dropped Gino. Then he looked at Dominic. "Take him to the docks. Make it slow." Dominic nodded and dragged the gasping Gino away like a sack of defective merchandise. The gunfire had stopped. The warehouse was still except for the hiss of a ruptured steam pipe and the distant wail of sirens that would arrive too late to matter. Enzo dropped the shotgun. He turned. His eyes found Jolene. She was standing in the middle of the wreckage, her hair wild, her lip bleeding, a fire extinguisher in one hand, and a stolen pistol she didn't know how to use in the other. Her apron was torn. Her knees were shaking. She had never looked less like a damsel in distress, and more like a woman who had decided, somewhere in the last hour, that she was done being the punchline. Enzo walked to her and stopped close enough that she could smell gunpowder and sandalwood and the faintest trace of espresso. His hands, rough and scarred, came up to cup her face with a gentleness that seemed impossible from a man who had just torn through a warehouse full of armed men. His thumb brushed the cut on her lip. "He did this. I did worse to his guy," Jolene said, her voice wobbling. "I think I shattered a kneecap, and I might have punctured a lung with my elbow. I don't know. My best subject, but I've never applied it offensively before." Enzo made a sound. It might have been a laugh. It was rough and broken and beautiful. The sound of something thawing that had been frozen for a very long time. "You broke out of the chair," he said. "It was a cheap chair. You took down an armed guard." He was looking at his phone, and I had a fire extinguisher. And honestly, it was mostly gravity and panic, 2 forces that govern my entire life. Enzo leaned his forehead against hers. His breath was warm and unsteady. "Joe, yeah, I was going to burn Providence to the ground. Every building, every block, every person who ever shook Gino Salerno's hand. Dominic talked me into a surgical approach, but I want you to know what I was willing to do." Jolene swallowed. "That's the most terrifying and flattering thing anyone has ever said to me. I'm not a good man, Joe. I know. I will never be a good man. I know that too, but I will be good to you. I will spend the rest of my life making sure nothing touches you. I will cover every sharp corner. I will carpet every floor. I will fire every person who makes you feel like you are anything less than the most extraordinary woman who has ever walked into a room and destroyed it, literally and figuratively." Jolene laughed. It came out wet and cracked and real, the laugh of a woman who had been underestimated her entire life and had just discovered that being underestimated was its own kind of superpower. "You know I'm going to keep breaking things," she said. "I'll keep replacing them. I might spill something on you again. I own 47 suits. You can ruin every single one. I'm going to trip on something in the next 30 seconds. It's statistically inevitable." Enzo scooped her up. All 270 pounds, lifted clean off the ground, cradled against his chest as if she were made of glass and not the dense, magnificent, inconvenient substance she actually was, and carried her toward the smashed-open warehouse doors where the rain was falling sideways through the headlights of his convoy. "Then I'll carry you," he said simply. He walked her out into the rain, past the wreckage and the shell casings, and the silent men who watched their boss carry a woman through the aftermath of a small war with the expression of a man holding something sacred. Back at the Harbour Grill, shifted permanently. Jolene didn't stop waitressing, not right away. Liked the work, she liked the routine. But her station was moved permanently to the private room, and the private room was now outfitted with wall-to-wall carpet, rounded table edges, and a chair that could comfortably support a small elephant because Dominic had sourced it from a medical supply catalogue and refused to feel embarrassed about it. She still dropped things, still tripped on the rug, despite the rug being specifically secured with anti-slip tape that Dominic had installed himself at 2 a.m. She once knocked a full bottle of Barolo onto Bishop's laptop, destroying 3 months of offshore accounting day data. Bishop stared at the ruined screen, looked at Jolene's horrified face, and simply said, "I had a backup, please stop crying." The men stopped betting on her disasters. Paulie, the hothead who had once mocked her weight, now held the kitchen door open for her every single shift and called her Miss Joe, with a deference that suggested he was still paying off his dental bill. Felix, the driver, started keeping extra napkins and a lint roller in the Escalade. One of the younger soldiers, a kid named Augustine, who couldn't have been older than 20, once asked Jolene to help him with his community college statistics homework, and when she explained standard deviation using cannoli as a visual aid, the entire backroom went quiet and listened. Jolene Prescott had walked into the shark tank and turned it into something that resembled, against all probability and common sense, a family, and Enzo Caruso, the man who had made an empire out of silence and violence, discovered that the only sound he wanted to hear for the rest of his life was the crash of something expensive breaking, followed by the voice of the woman he loved, saying, "Oh no, oh no, oh no, I am so sorry." He never got tired of it. Not once, because Jolene Prescott was chaos in comfortable shoes, and Enzo Caruso would gladly let her destroy everything he owned, every suit, every glass, every carefully constructed wall around his frozen heart, just to keep her exactly where she belonged. Beside him, clumsy and brilliant and unapologetically, magnificently herself.